Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with Christopher Hitchens. When the library called me a couple of months ago to say that he would be in town and he'd written a memoir and would I like to interview him, I said absolutely yes, without a second thought. And I interviewed Christopher Hitchens many years ago on the book that you wrote about Bill Clinton, No One Left to Lie to. And that was my first introduction to Christopher Hitchens. Then he was a guest on the show talking about the Iraq War, and then just a couple of years ago was a guest on Radio Times for God Is Not Great. So I know how smart he is, what a big brain he has, what an extraordinary mind he has, but what interested me in this memoir is what a big heart he has. And this is a very generous, open-hearted book, and I'm very much looking forward to interviewing Christopher Hitchens. But before we do that, you have 30 seconds to take his picture. And then we're going to stop, and then I'm going to interview him. So go right ahead.
And if there's anyone being kept outside, it seems a shame there are these wasted seats in the front. No one's being kept away, are they, with all this room?
No. All right, no. So just flash away, take away.
I have compassion for my public.
He cares. All right, I think we have dispensed with that. When you were 30, did you have this image of what you would be when you were 60 years old? Could you even contemplate that?
No. I didn't mind being 30 either, since you ask.
No one did they?
No, actually I rather enjoyed it. It was when I decided I'd have to get out of England then or not go. I thought it would been okay, I've been to the United States, I've kept going there. It's really time that I answered the real gravitational pull of the US and got out of the sort of warm bath of the English literary world and came here. So I thought if I spend my 40s here, I'll go stale. So it was important in that way. So I knew that at 60 I'd be here if I was spared.
And you made it.
And then, and then 40 didn't matter to me very much, or 50, the occasional midlife twinge. But 60 was the point when I was asked to consider writing a memoir. I thought probably yes, because one's thoughts are turning a little bit retrospective at that stage.
Do you feel yourself, though, entering old fogeydom?
It was the same week that I read about my death, than which there can be nothing more fogyish. There was I got a hysterical letter of apology from the National Portrait Gallery in London. It had an exhibition of a sort of set of people, which I used to remember, well, some ways still am, in which a transposed caption led to them referring to the late Christopher Hitchens, and I can just tell you tomorrow will be Bloomsday.
That's right.
I opened my book with Leopold Bloom saying, you should read your death notice. Gives you a new lease on life, and I can tell you it concentrates the mind at any rate. And gets rid of the boring question, isn't it too soon to do a memoir? Because you say, well, mate, I'm not late, but you can't leave it too late.
But He
wrote his memoirs too late. You've never read that.
Exactly. But did you trust your memory? I mean, you go back to the beginning,
yes,
to your childhood.
My memory is not as good as that of Salvador Dali, who claims to remember being born. But it's very good, and it doesn't let me down, and I can remember a lot of what I've read. There's nothing to boast about. It's not a skill I acquired or can claim any credit for. But yeah, my memory's uncomfortably good. In
the book, you call your mother Yvonne,
yes,
and your father the Commander.
Yes.
Is that what you called them as a child?
Yes. It was rather
At
strange.
your request, at their request, or?
Well, Mummy and Daddy didn't seem to quite do it, and my father's 12 years older than my mother, and rather dour, rather disappointed man. Spent all his life in the Royal Navy, had a very tough Second World War. Once told me that was the only time in his life when he was fighting the Nazis that he felt he knew what he was doing, though he didn't completely know what he was doing because Winston Churchill sent him to run ships full of weapons to Joseph Stalin, which hadn't been at all what he'd signed up to do. But nonetheless, he answered the call of duty and was very valorous about it, but was always afterwards very in low water. And so our apotropaic name for him was the Commander. He seemed to fit this rather distant, rather sad guy, but also to do him honor. And my mother's name was Yvonne, and most of the wives of my father's brother officers were called things like, I hope I don't offend anyone.
Yeah, go ahead. Uh-oh.
Marjorie.
That happens to be my name, but that's
Ethel.
okay.
Ethel. Comfortable names like that.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas I thought that Yvonne had, when I was a little boy, I thought she was very beautiful. Indeed, she was interested in fashion. Wanted a splash of colour in what was a very drab post-war environment, and Yvonne seemed to suit her somehow.
Well, and I have to say the passages that you write about your mother are just so beautiful and so moving. You write she was the cream in the coffee, the gin in the Campari, the offer of wine or champagne instead of beer, the laugh in the face of bores and purse mouths and skinflints, the insurance against bigots and prudes.
Yeah, she was all that, and she told me that the worst thing in life to be was to be boring. And the worst crime against women.
Was to be boring.
Boring men, yeah.
In fact, you've said
I thought that might get a twinge.
Has that been a fear of yours, though, a lifelong fear to be boring? Not that you are.
Can't stand being bored. It's a physical dread with me. I start curling my toes so I don't fall over backwards in a deep swoon. And resolved as far as possible not to be boring. And I've told people, do tell me. Right. Do please, if I appear to prose on at all. But I, paradoxically, because my book I hope is paradoxical, I do say in the book that one of the great tests you may have to pass if you believe in a cause and believe in it strongly is the willingness or the ability to be boring about it, to keep on with the argument, to keep on saying it, to not let the propaganda of the other side get accepted as the routine story, and stay with your friends and comrades even when they're in low water, and be willing to be dull and relentless about it. You know, I can bore on if you want. Try me.
Let me ask you, though, something else about your mother. And she fell in love with another man and died in a suicide. I don't know if it was a pact or not, but nonetheless, she fell in love with a man who killed her and then killed himself.
Well, that's how it was reported in the newspapers when I first heard it, which was a very great clutch. I can still feel it. That I knew she had waited probably rather too long till my brother and I had left home to take up with another guy. And I'd met him, and I found him the reverse of my father. He was outgoing and charming in a rather slightly flaky way. But he was more what she needed. Cocktail parties, theatre trips, that kind of thing. My father wouldn't have been interested in. But he was bipolar, and she didn't need to die, but he did. Yeah. And he didn't. I thought he'd killed her and then killed himself. Actually, what he'd done, I had to go to Athens to find this out, and my mother's hotel room was a crime scene when I got there. But over the course of a forensic, horrible investigation, I found that they'd made an agreement to put an end to both their lives. They just saw no point in going on. It hadn't worked out. They hadn't got any money. She felt she was losing her looks, I think, which was very precious to her. And she just couldn't see it getting anything more than steadily worse. So.
Well, let me quote you again, because, again, this is another very moving, it's actually just a sentence here, but this is about your mother. She may not have needed or wanted to die, but she needed or wanted someone who did need and did want to die. This is beyond anhedonia. And sometimes I think they're just things that children cannot understand about their parents.
No, and that'll always be true, and I learned from it various things. I'll mention only two, I think. One, there isn't such a thing as a suicidal type, I don't think. There can't be, because she just wasn't. But she really did do it. Yeah. And the second is that there's a lot of nonsense talked about closure and healing. And what I say in the book is that closure and healing are meaningless to me. They're not worth having. They're oversold. I don't want this wound to go away. I want it to stay fresh till my own last day. And that's partly because the streets of Athens were full of tanks at this time, and the coroner was an official of the fascist regime, and the friends of mine at the university are being shot and tortured. So it was an amazing context of war and revolution as well. But in all this chaos, I found that she